All right, we are at Fairmont, Austin. We're about to kick things off. Today's VIP day at Consensus. I'm here with my co-host for the day, Pink Bambi. Let's get it.
Some VIP ticket.
Hey! You man's got the VIP tick. I got the press pass. Just a bunch of degens, you know. There's no way. So we're trying to find where we can check in. Oh, thank you, sir. Right over there. Ooh, that's a pretty painting.
It's been a minute now, milking every opportunity.
Yes, if I could just see those QR codes.
Okay. I have a press
It's gonna be on the
pass.
homepage of the app.
I don't know if I need to go somewhere. Yeah.
The Piranha desk.
Oh, thank you. We're press.
Yeah.
Press for time. Yeah, let's see that.
Yeah.
Boom, we got Pink Bambi. Of course, we got our press pass, the Decentraland Report. Let's go.
I want to go to the one that says redesigning the system with humans and the planet in mind.
Ooh, redesigning with the planets in mind?
Redesigning the system with humans and the planet in mind. So it's like, how can we do redesigning of those all systems and the metaverse while creating good things, while having humans and the planet in mind? It's like,
I love it.
It's amazing.
Level 7.
Let's do it. Let's go quick.
We gotta get there quick. It's gonna start. Excuse me.
It's very important for creators to think about reimagining stuff, but in an ethical way. If we're talking about advancement of technology, I think we should do technology for good. I think that's the way that it will give us like a reason of why we are creating. I think the planet is in so much trouble, and humans themselves with depression, anxiety, high increase of suicidal rates, etc. And I think we could only make an impact if
We're
make
conscious
this,
about it.
yeah, and create safe spaces. And I'm very excited to see what this talk is about.
Eman, I gotta ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why did Vitalik's unicorn eat all the cotton candy?
Because it was pink.
Maybe that's the answer.
I'm Pink Bambi. That's my answer.
That's her answer. Let's reimagine money, folks.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you.
Cause I'm looking for my way to the top. I've been working all day, working all night.
Completely open, where everybody has access to the Federal Reserve, right? And you can just live off the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. And we realize there are downsides to some of those things too. In a purely open system, you know, there's not going to be a lot of competition because one player will eventually dominate the whole thing. There are many different types of things. We might have illicit actors abusing the system if it's truly fully open. So now we can make policy choices based on what we actually want as a society, rather than just have them dictated to us by the limitations of technology. So it's an interesting question. And as a good lawyer, I didn't answer your question one bit, just to be clear. I acknowledge, I did not answer that question at all, but I hopefully established a framework by which we can all answer it together.
Very much so. And I'll just plug in quickly to just say, I do think our policy very much reflected the realities of what was practically possible, both technically and from kind of a legal perspective. And the idea is that we've created in our policies exclusion-first systems. So when you think about who has access to even make, let's take the use case that draws all the drama, investment options and make investment decisions, you have to, in the United States, be pre-wealthy. You have to have a certain level of wealth that you can demonstrate in a certain way, by the way. It's not even like you could just have wealth as defined by any logical person. It's particularly prescribed kind of wealth before you can make certain kinds of decisions, and you're permitted to do that. So we've structured some of the exclusion first principles in our regulation in ways that have been a response in some ways to the closedness of legacy systems. But I just wanted to land that point because you mentioned policy, and I agree completely that this is very much a culture and policy question that should be driven by certain constraints, but those constraints no longer exist in many parts of the ecosystem. But Diana, over to you to get your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, so just building off what Patrick said, essentially today we have two types of money. We have, and it's in a hierarchy, state money issued by the government, and then bank money, which you could argue is some of that is actually issued out of thin air, but it's based on the lending needs and this sort of closed system that banks operate in. You have another layer on top of that of corporate money, but that's essentially building into the bank money as well. And what's really fascinating with the advent of Bitcoin, arguably, is that for the first time you had a money that's actually operating outside of both of those systems. And this technology then allows us to look beyond that existing paradigm that we're operating within, which, Sheila, as you mentioned, is quite closed. We've always had an opt out of that to some extent, and if we look at marginalized populations, which I think is the most interesting when we're thinking about open money and who do we really need these systems to work for first, is that we've had cash. Cash is non-judgmental, cash is data-free, cash is accessible to everyone. But as we move into what everybody seems to think is an inevitable future where we have digital money, what then happens to the types of communities and, say, political dissidents, activists, those marginalized communities that depended on cash? And so I think when we're looking at how do we build open money, an actual digital cash that has those inherent qualities still is incredibly important.
You know, I think it's really funny because there's this kind of, it's a bit mean, but the idea is if we were to design anything today, we would never design physical cash. That would just never happen. Nobody would ever permit it. It'd be too scary and threatening and whatnot. But now that you have actual physical cash, I think it is impossible in my mind to imagine that that ever goes away. But of course, it's predicated on the willingness, and I wouldn't even say desire, it's actually the willingness of central banks to continue to mint, to print, and to mint physical cash. And so I do see a world in which all these different forms of money remain available. You do have the sort of physical M1, like in your hands. You do have central bank issued digital fiat. You do have stable coins, which are pegged to something extrinsic, in some cases fiat, in some cases other things that have an extrinsic kind of volatility. And then you have crypto, what I call pure crypto, which has its own intrinsic value determined largely by the market, the utility, et cetera. But I'm curious, and I want to frame this in the context of interoperability, because I think you made some really interesting observations, Natalia, that we're not talking, or you're not talking anyway, about supplanting completely and having a revolution where we get rid of everything that exists. You're saying we need to be able to have, I think what you're talking about is about agency and choice. As consumers at the retail level, meaning people who just engage in transactions every day, I think we deserve the opportunity to explore what are these different technologies, these different opportunities, different options allowing us. And we'll choose. If I feel like physical cash is better for me because it's easier because I'm in whatever world I'm in, I should be able to make that choice. If I feel like I have, for some reason, a CBDC that's designed in a certain way is useful for me, personally I'm skeptical, but if that comes, I might choose to use that instead. Or I may say crypto is what works for me because I have different needs. And so the idea is that none of these categories, apart from physical cash, are monolithic. They all have design choices that go into them, and the design is going to differentiate in the areas of privacy, scalability, and interoperability. So I'd love to just get, what is your vision of what you think should happen, and what you think is actually going to happen when it comes to A, the availability of these different options, and B, the ability for them to fluidly interact, and how does that play into this concept of openness? Whoever wants to go first, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. So there is, and Diana's a great point about the cashless future, and it's always so rosy. It's it's gonna be amazing, right? We just tap and buy things. It's gonna be awesome, right? And it's what's not said is that what's a public utility now is being co-opted by corporations, right? Because cash is a public utility. All the other forms of money that are out there, and there are a proliferation of monies, and I don't just mean different currencies, but Venmo versus cash versus Square Cash versus all these different things, Money Pack and all these different things, right? You have a public utility in cash, which is under attack right now, and it's being replaced by systems and forms of money which are corporate. And I'm not anti-corporate, I'm a good old-fashioned capitalist, it's fine, good, make a profit, that's great. But I mean, it's a different type of thing, it's a different beast entirely. And I'm not sure we should be comfortable just saying that we should eliminate this public utility from our lives or celebrate that at this point in time in particular, And I'm not convinced that a CBDC won't also be captured in the same way, even if it's positioned and marketed as a public utility. So, you know, what could happen is that we have a privacy preserving CBDC that is available and functions like cash for people, that's, you know, negotiable and fungible and all these wonderful things, and acts and feels like the physical cash we have today, except it's in a digital form and it's very convenient, and we can now transact it across borders and everywhere. And that's a wonderful future, but that ain't gonna happen, right? Like, does anybody, show of hands, who thinks that's the future we're heading towards? Okay, I see 0 hands, so we're all in agreement that that's not going to happen. So what's more likely to happen is that you're going to see some sort of like corporate version of this, right? And that's my biggest fear with stablecoins, in particular centralized stablecoins right now, and it's the underlying threat that people don't talk about. And, you know, God bless, you know, Center and Circle and you know, Tether and all these people who are issuing these very centralized systems that are effectively, you know, competing to be the CBDC for the US in corporate form. But I don't think that's really a positive future for how you would generate a public utility for everyone. And I don't think it's in the best interest of everybody to have one single corporate centralized entity that is serving that role that's not accountable effectively to the public. So I think it's something, when you think about these stable coins, arrangements, and things like that, like, that's where we're heading. Right? And is that the future we want? Can we do like a better job of how we're thinking about those arrangements and how we can mitigate against sort of that particular risk?
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think we also need to be thinking about incentive structures, right? So my kind of like macro view on this is that, how do you help preserve monetary sovereignty? You have all of these countries across, you know, different GDP, different like even socioeconomic statuses in terms of their populations. How are you helping?
It's been a minute now, milking every opportunity. I should get a cow, never seen an obstacle that I couldn't get around. But I'm not from royalty, so I didn't get a crown. These thoughts were written down for those who sit and frown, complain every